Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. Today we're talking about a very current and present issue in contemporary politics, especially UK politics, which of course is the whole Epstein, Mandelson, Starmer scandal. So, for those of you who have been living under a rock, really, Jeffrey Epstein, former American financier, has this list and this island where a lot of very weird and troubling events have happened with regard to sort of prostitution of minors and sexual abuses, and the list goes on. And 3 million documents, John, have been released recently.
Yes, Diane. So on the January 30th, 3 million documents regarding things, everything from Jeffrey Epstein's personal text messages, emails, letters, photos, many photos has been seen, even things like the newspapers he had at his home. 3 million pages of all these documents have been released. And I think even still now, media outlets are combing through this data effectively because there's been so much which has been revealed. You described there Peter Mandelson. His relationship with Epstein has now been fully exposed, one which is fairly horrifying. Similarly, it's raised questions about Starmer and whether he will resign. But before we get into that, Diane, let's just think about Starmer in general. Before we discuss when will he resign, do you think he needs to resign?
Well, it's a very difficult question. I think a lot of people are calling for it, but honestly, I tend to disagree with them. Um, he wasn't there, right? Mandelson was there, and yes, that's problematic because they had connections one with another. However, I don't think that he should be punished for something Mandelson did. We don't know if Keir Starmer actually fully knew what was going on, whether Mandelson was there. So, I think it's a bad situation. It's a bad look for the Labour Party more than it is for Keir Starmer. Um, and if I were him, I wouldn't resign. What do you think, John?
To be honest, I think Starmer's resignation will come about. Keir Starmer's premiership has been fairly disastrous since the start, since when he got into office in July 2024. We covered it. It started awfully with the Lord Wahid Ali donation scandal.
Yeah.
Then it was other events, his constant U-turns, whether it was around benefits, his other economic policies attracted so much criticism, things such as inheritance tax on farmers. There's still protests going on about these. And I just feel that Starmer's economic policies have lacked impact. Similarly, whilst he's sort of been perhaps better on the foreign policy side, people care less about foreign policy. So Starmer's premiership has been pretty much disastrous. He's achieved little. And I think this scandal with Mandelson is fairly symbolic of just how shambolic his time in office has been so far. I don't know why Mandelson perhaps wasn't properly vetted. I think if Mandelson should have surely realised the extent of his relationship with Epstein and how much of it was documented. So I do think that. So I'm surprised that Mandelson didn't reveal more about his relationship with Epstein. And I imagine that simply Starmer didn't perhaps vet him enough. And I think it was always a weird appointment. Mandelson's been this sort of dark prince, a slippery operator of British politics since serving under Gordon Brown and even before when he reconstructed and helped to rebuild the Labour Party. But more to that, Dan, what do you think of this character of Peter Mandelson? He's someone that's really come to the forefront in the last few days, and perhaps one of the most influential backroom operators of British politics.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd first like to disagree
Oh yeah,
with you saying that Peter Mandelson would have known. I mean, I think if you look, I think most people who went to the island never thought that there's ever going to be a moment where they're going to be exposed. No one whistleblowed, no one said anything. Everyone kept actually turning back and emailing or messaging Jeffrey and playing nice with him. So it just seems weird to me. I think the vast majority of people on the island just thought they had, they wanted this impression that it's never going to be found out. And if it was going to be found out about Epstein, it's not going to be found out about them. I'm not really sure how much they knew of the whole documentation that Epstein had on them, the whole pictures and sort of cameras in the bathrooms and bedrooms and everywhere, really. There were cameras everywhere on the island, apparently. So I find it hard to believe, but as you said, Mandelson is this dark prince, and now he's definitely a dark prince.
Yeah, but I mean, I even think though for Mandelson that he would have known because when he was appointed to be US ambassador in 2024, the cat was out of the bag in the sense that it was known that he was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. It was known that there'd be further legal criminal proceedings regarding it. So I do think it was known then. The whistles were blown in that sense
Yeah.
about Epstein. It was known that Mandelson was a friend of him. So I do think it should have been clearer. But the big question about Starmer resignation, I'm slightly keen on it. I said I felt like he's had a fairly disastrous time in office. But the key question which remains is when. When will he resign? So he survived the last few days, which is fairly admirable for Sir Keir because it's been a week in British politics that
Yeah.
one would struggle to get through. So when do you think he will resign, Diane?
Yeah, I think before we get on to that,
Oh
just,
yes.
maybe he was made US ambassador for the reason that he was friends with Epstein. Maybe he, and with all, I'm saying this with all knowledge that I might have some very nasty TikTok comments after this, but maybe that's where he met Trump for the first time and,
Yeah.
befriended him. So it could be a strategic appointment from Sakir, uh, putting
Yeah.
Mandelson, who has had some social interactions with Trump in the past. I mean, more than definitely, both were friends with Epstein. Trump says he didn't go to the island, but even then, both were friends with Epstein and maybe met through that connection initially. So now on to the big question of, is there going to be a resignation, and if so, when? I wouldn't resign. I just don't see why he would resign. There's a bit of pressure, but realistically, there's no one there ready to take over. Angela Rayner's not ready. She's been out of the spotlight for a couple of months, had that big problem with the tax revenue and the sort of whole that issue. West Streeting. Also, he's a bit of a friend of Peter Mandelson as well. And is a bit young, doesn't have that sort of appeal yet. I think if Andy Burnham was an MP, or if he was allowed to run as an MP, I think Sir Keir would have had a massive problem. A very, very big problem. And in that case, I think, he should have resigned and allowed Andy Burnham to take over and try and get the Labour Party back on track. But at the moment, I mean, I think there's a risk of going from bad to worse. Everyone says get rid of Starmer, but who's going to take over? And why do we think it's going to be any better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few things there. I mean, first you mentioned Starmer wouldn't want to resign, and I think that's obvious. But the big
Yeah.
threat to him is if the Labour MPs want him to resign. So to remind our listeners, for there to be a leadership election or challenge contest, 20% of the Labour MPs need to formally oppose a replacement candidate. So at the moment, with 405 Labour MPs, that would need 81 Labour MPs to back someone else as leader. And this would be very exceptional in the sense that no Labour leader in the past has ever been dethroned, one could say. Some leaders have survived challenges, but no one's ever been replaced as leader of the Labour Party during a time in office. So I think it would be very interesting if Starmer was. You mentioned the two big names there, Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting. I think Angela's got to sort of sort out her tax issues firstly, but then she could be popular. She's likely popular with the Labour membership, who would then vote on who the Labour leader would become. And I think the Labour MPs are slightly more left wing than the rest of the country is, or the country generally is. So I think that could be popular. Similarly, where Streeting could have support, but you mentioned the key thing there, Diane, and that is Wes Streeting's friendship with Peter Mandelson. He's recently published some text messages, which we'll go into in a second. But these text messages really revealed the extent of their relationship. even quite bold statements Wes made, which
Yeah.
would annoy Sir Keir. So Wes said, and this is quote unquote, that there was no economic growth plan for this current Labour government. So he's been quite brutal about Sir Keir. I'm sure Keir isn't happy, but I think those two would be the candidates to replace him. But they've both got sort of respective things to figure out. When is the interesting question? We've obviously got the Gorton and Denton by-election, which will grow some sort of animosity towards a Keir because Labour are likely to lose it. But I think the real blow to Sir Keir will come on the 7th of May, which is when we've got the elections, the local elections in England. And Labour will, well, expectedly not perform very well in these. And I think if perhaps one of those two names we mentioned has gathered enough momentum by those May elections, they could launch a successful challenge to Sir Keir. But what do you think, Diane? Do you think Sir Keir's got to go more generally? And may be a long time away, but do you think anyone will be ready by then?
Well, I think I'm gonna sort of have a
Yeah,
bit of an unpopular opinion, but I didn't think so. I mean, has he been fantastic? No, but at the same time, as I've said, it could be a lot worse. Sir Keir going at a time like this does open the floodgates for a couple of things. Number one, a weaker candidate. I wouldn't like West Streeting or Angela Rayner.
yeah,
I prefer Sir Keir to both of them for very different reasons. But Angela Rayner, I don't think has the sort of experience really. Being the deputy prime minister isn't a sort of fledged out cabinet role as is sort of being foreign secretary or home secretary. So I think Angelina just needs a bit more experience for me, but I'm sure some people don't have a problem with that issue. But also, West Streeting, I just personality from what I've seen of him, I'm not a big fan. Also, the Peter Mandelson situation for him is particularly bad. So I think if I was a Labour MP, I would like it to stick it out as much as he can. Try and go on for maybe another year. And then when the time is right, have a contest and resign when there's a proper candidate ready to take over. One that maybe will get a bit of the anti-Keir vote. But it's not the moment. There's no election coming. There are bigger fish to fry, frankly, with the whole Greenland situation unveiling and the sort of, we've just seen Ukraine's going to have a referendum on the peace deal. So there's a lot of bigger issues at play. And I just don't think it's the right time for the Labour Party. I mean, having a leadership challenge now, also for the local elections, it just damages everything. It just shows the party isn't united, and people don't really like that, especially when you've got Reform and the Greens and even not the Tories, but other people banging on your doorstep, ready to take your seats away from you.
yeah. I mean, I think I agree with you. I don't think Angela Rayner has the skill, has the ability to run England effectively. I think she would probably be an awful prime minister. But perhaps that isn't the point because it's what the Labour Party members, it's what the MPs, what the party members, the sort of general party members, what they think. And I think this is a group of quite left wing individuals who, bizarrely for you and me, Diane, are actually quite keen on people like Angela Rayner, even more so than Wes Streeting or someone like Shabana Mahmood, who find themselves on the more right wing side of the Labour Party. The support really isn't there. It's bizarrely with people like Rayner, in my opinion. But I think also to slightly challenge what you said, I think perhaps the British public and the Labour Party are finding themselves to be almost at a low at their worst point. That Labour's currently doing awfully in the polls. They're sort of polling around 18, 19% popularity, which, along with Sir Keir Starmer's personal polling ratings, is some of the worst the Labour Party has ever seen on record. Similarly, I think the Labour MPs and the party members have just taken every single blow to Sir Keir's leadership, to his popularity, quite personally. And I do think they've accumulated Yes, it's unstable. Yes, it's not the best for this current, constantly changing geopolitical world in which we live in. But I think the Labour Party members, their anger and their frustration will grow. And I think, unfortunately, that could lead to someone like Angela Rayner being Prime Minister, seeming that she is quite popular in that area.
I mean,
Yeah.
I do prefer Angela Rayner to Wes Streeting, to be honest.
Why?
Um, I think just a sort of a very shallow reason, really. I mean, I think Wes Streeting is some of his comments towards NHS workers who are genuinely very underpaid. Let's be very honest here about how they're sort of crybabies. I mean, when you're going to be paid as much as a Starbucks barista and working 48 hours in a row with people quite literally vomiting blood on you, then I don't think you can really be called a crybaby. I think comments like that and also his general attitude, uh, it's just not something that resonated with me. It's not a best reason. I'll be very honest, but I think sometimes in politics, it's it's those kind of reasons that actually make the biggest difference. I think very few people actually take the sort of everything and calculate the sort of positions and policies that people would implement, and sometimes it's just based on sort of vibes. And I think I prefer the vibes Angela Rayner gives compared to him.
To be honest, I would
Personally.
disagree. I'd find it quite difficult to find someone who's got a better persona, a worse persona than Angela Rayner. I think Angela Rayner's persona is fairly awful. I think she's continually demonstrated as a cabinet minister that she really lacks any sort of almost competence to effectively run a country. I mean, she couldn't even sort of take heed of advice properly regarding her taxation, which was not even just her own error. That was actually, I think, it was almost her not taking advice, legal advice. And perhaps Wes has been rude to members of the NHS, and perhaps these claims do have a basis. But then I think he's admittedly probably had sort of a hard job amidst the unions. But I don't think he's been totally ineffective with the NHS Wes. I think he's actually been pretty all right. I think waiting times in hospitals are down. He's tried to sort of mount the insurmountable challenge of the NHS. Only a few days ago, right amidst the Peter Mandelson news, he launched a very impressive NHS cancer plan. It's a leading cancer plan for the world. And I think he wanted to give over 2 billion of funding to combat cancer. And had the Mandelson stuff not been in the news, this would have most definitely been at the forefront. So I do have reservations towards him as well. I don't think he really is prime ministerial. He's not, no, by no means at all my ideal candidate to run the party, like he's yours, Diane. But for me, Rayner, I really just don't think should be a good PM. I think Wes showed far more sort of ability, far more skill than Rayner has. I mean, I think I think Wes has a professionalism to him, which also Rayner lacked. Was it dancing in DJ booths in Ibiza? We saw her. I mean, it's just things like that which
Yeah,
shocks
but
me.
I mean, it's a changing world. I think we've not necessarily outgrown, but we've left behind the times when politicians were these sort of very reserved, very sort of cold, ice-like figures, sort of, Angela Merkel or those kinds of sort of public personas where they were very professional. I think now we've reached a very different time. We've got the sort of TikTok generation, the TikTok prime ministers, and you've got to be able to connect with the young generation. I think she has been able to do that. So I'm a bit less sort of hung up on that, but I fully understand. And I think what we'd both like to see really is a serious contender for the challenge. So,
Yeah,
someone like Andy Burnham really for me. And honestly, maybe someone like David Lammy.
perhaps. Yeah.
David Lammy, as Zach Goldsmith mentioned before, one of the champions on environment. So yeah, someone like David Lammy, I think would be a closer to what I'd like to see.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Perhaps David Lammy doesn't really stand out to me as someone who's shouting, "I could be prime minister." But I think with Andy Burnham, there's a bit of a Burnham bubble which I'd almost want to slightly burst. He's slightly bigged
Yeah.
up due to social media. Things like he's been called the King of the North, which is slightly genuine. I mean, he's very popular in the north of England. However, some view him as being not particularly effective as Mayor of Manchester. Um, some view him as not actually being too effective in that role. Similarly, he's tried to become Labour leader twice before and failed, which is fairly revealing to me. The circumstances are different, but is revealing to me that he's never been a standout candidate throughout his political career, Andy Burnham. Perhaps he's becoming more so now, but I wonder if that's a sort of anti-Keir effect, which is rubbing off on Burnham. Um, yeah,
Well, I don't know. I think, from what I've seen, it's a bit of both. I think he can, because he's mayor of Manchester, I think he's got this much easier time connecting with people that don't necessarily live in the London
yeah, that
bubble,
is important. Yeah,
and he's a bit more personable to them and understands them a bit better. I also think, Manchester, people say he's not been effective, but I mean, he's one of the more effective mayors,
I suppose. Yeah,
really. I mean, there's a lot of people who were mayors and who did a much, much worse job than him.
yeah,
So I think overall, don't want to name any names, but I think overall he's been all right, both in his professional career, but also he's got the right sort of balance between knowing how to run a big city like Manchester, but also being sort of down to earth and personable to people from all different backgrounds, not just the ones that live in London or in sort of very big urban areas.
yeah. I mean, perhaps, and there's someone, a name which I would prefer to be leader of the Labour Party, but there's not really a chance. Is Shabana Mahmood, someone also not from London? She's from Birmingham, and I think the
Yeah.
Labour Party has been perceived amongst its members to have been far too London centric, and in fact, all of pretty much UK politics for a while, for about the last decade, has or over the last decade, has perceived to be very London centric. It's all about someone from the southeast or someone who sort of appears to be someone from the southeast. Whereas someone like Burnham or Shabana Mahmood, they're not that, which is popular. Um, which is popular. Burnham, very, very different politically to Shabana Mahmood within the Labour Party, him being far more left wing. But but I think the Burnham bubble is burst. Starmer was never going to allow him to be an MP because that's just allowing someone to sort of almost
Take his party
exactly.
from
I
you.
mean, in Keir's defence, he would have been an idiot to allow Burnham to run in that by-election. Like, why would he have done it? So it made sense that he didn't do it. But even with Burnham was a distant second in the 2015 Labour leadership contest to Jeremy Corbyn. So he's not the most popular. He's not got this career of being extremely popular or extremely admired within the Labour Party itself.
We also do have to remember, though, I think that Corbyn did have this sort of almost rock star effect with the Labour Party at the
Yeah,
start.
he
So
did. He did, but it just
yeah,
shows that
hard to
Burnham
beat.
didn't, though. In a way, Burnham didn't have
Yeah, true,
that
true.
effect. I mean, Burnham didn't have that effect. But to conclude the episode with that, we've discussed the recent Epstein files, the downfall of Peter Mandelson, which has been dominating the headlines, but also the pertinent question, which everyone has been asking. Me and Dan have been asking it to each other. Will Starmer resign? And if he will, when will he? So we hope you've enjoyed the
When?
episode.
Thank you. You've enjoyed it. Thank you. Leave us a comment, review if you enjoyed or if you didn't enjoy the episode. Um, Also, if you have any ideas for what you'd like to see next, do let us know on any of our social media platforms. And we wish you a very good week. Hopefully, wherever you are, it gets a
Yeah.
bit warmer, a bit drier, and overall a bit nicer.
That's a
See you
good
next
point,
week.
actually. It's raining in the UK, but if you are listening from abroad, do comment where you're from. We've had some quite unique countries. I think over 60, even I think 6 continents, Dan, haven't we? So do comment where you're
Yeah.
listening from. We've got a loyal UK, American, Romanian audience, but aside from that, we're not too sure. Yeah.
Thank you and see you next week. Bye.